'Cause I'll be your friend, an ear I'll lend. I'll tell you time and time again, it's true.
Welcome back to our cosy, comfy corner of the world. I'm Amy Smythe, a counsellor and psychotherapist, and whether you're joining us for the first time or if you've been with us through previous episodes, I'm so glad that you're here. Over the past few episodes, we've explored what it's like to step into uncomfortable spaces with our children, to sit alongside big feelings, and to notice what happens when we wobble and then find our way back to repair. Today, I want to share something that I notice often in my own life and in the lives of those around me. So I was having tea with a friend recently and she'd made me food, and before I could even say anything, she rushed in with, "Oh, it's not hot enough. Oh, I'm sorry if it's a bit lumpy. Or it was all a bit rushed. I'm not very good at cooking." And she went on naming every flaw that she could think of before anyone else could. And I found myself wondering what was happening there. It didn't feel like modesty, it felt more like protection, criticising herself first, just in case someone else might. The truth is, just to say, it was lovely. And honestly, having someone else make tea for you, well, it's a bit of a gift. But it led to this, to me thinking, what might our children be learning when they hear us do that? When we struggle to hold our own good stories, when we rush to point out the flaws before we can acknowledge what went well. We might be teaching them without ever meaning to, that this is a safer way to be. And that brings us to today's conversation, because sometimes our children get stuck in a story about themselves that only remembers what went wrong. They can't see their own goodness, no matter how much we might see it in them. I'm delighted to welcome back family therapist Denise Bevan. And with Denise's help today, we're going to explore what it might mean to hold the good stories our children can't carry yet, and how we might do that when we're also finding it hard to hold our own. Denise, it's lovely to have you here. In our family podcast, Worry Wizard Wonderings, we recently sat with a wondering that one of our young listeners shared, which was, "I don't think I'm good at anything. I only remember the times I messed up. I try, but it feels like I always do something wrong. I wish I could see the good things, but they're hard to find." If you've heard that episode, you'll know we explored this through Sunny's story. But today, I would like us to wonder together about what that means for us as grown-ups caring for a child. Because when our child feels this way, it can touch something deep in us too. And I'd like to be honest here. I've caught myself rushing in with those big declarations. You know, "You're wonderful, you're amazing, you're so loved." I said it recently to a child because it felt almost unbearable to sit with how harshly they saw themselves. And I noticed how strong the urge was to want to shift them quickly from feeling horrid things to feeling better. But what I also noticed was it didn't really land. Maybe it wasn't what they needed in that moment. Denise, I think many grown-ups listening might recognise this pattern where they're working hard to notice the good stories in their child, small moments of kindness or trying, but their child can't see them. And even if they can, the child doesn't feel like it counts, like it's big enough, special enough. You know, one good story might appear, but by bedtime it's disappeared. Yet one story they don't like about themselves, it feels like it sticks.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty annoying because that's sort of how our brains are built. And, our brains are, well, they're literally built to connect with bad stuff and to remember bad stuff and to remember threat. And that's the reason for that is it's an evolutionary way of keeping us safe and to recognise threat and bad things. And it keeps knocking on the door, really, of our brain to say, "Hey, remember this." It's annoying, but there is a reason for it. But inevitably, it's not terribly useful generally. And there's a fantastic psychologist called Rick Hanson who describes the brain as like Velcro for bad stuff. So it just sort of sticks, and then Teflon for good stuff, so it just slides off, no matter, we'll try and praise our children, won't we? We'll try and say nice things to each other, but it's a bit like an interview sort of thing. You'll just remember the failure, won't you? Think, oh, I must have sounded like a real idiot there. You won't remember, the 10 good points that you made, perhaps. So actually, Rick talks again about how do we manage that then? Because it's something to be managed, and he talks about the idea of bringing the idea of a garden to our brain, and he talks about how naturally weeds grow in a garden, don't they? Don't need any fertilizer, they don't need to be planted, they're there, aren't they? Whereas actually, like bad thoughts are just there because actually that's how brains are built. But actually, to grow beautiful thoughts and kind thoughts and good feelings about ourselves, we have to plant them. We have to nurture them. We have to look after them. We have to actively seek them. It's not sort of something that's biologically natural. So I think what we understand from that is that we have to work purposefully to deal with the Velcro thoughts. And of course, some children may struggle more than others with that if they've had adversity in their life, such as bereavement, stressful situations, maybe moving house, changing friendships. They'll perhaps need more opportunities to explore these experiences and these difficult thoughts with somebody. So there's a lot in there.
There is a lot in there. But I suppose what you just said at the end, it is really important that it seeing the good, which is a phrase that's probably quite a therapeutic phrase, but it isn't about persuading a child to paint everything as positive. You're talking about that there's a distinction there between not noticing the lovely. That I'm just thinking about that flower image. You talked about purpose, actively cultivating, knowing the good stuff about yourself, but it isn't about trying to persuade a child to paint everything as positive. So there's something about witnessing rather than convincing. What you talked about, offering space for the difficult. So if there have been things that actually are in a child's mind because they were experienced as difficult, how do we hold space for that alongside the stories that show the things that are precious in the child, like kindness or how they show up as a friend, and that idea that when you can hold space for the difficult alongside the good, it shows children, going back to earlier conversations, they can be loved in the fullness of themselves.
Yes, I think there's that balance of accepting, the difficult thoughts and validating those, and allowing acceptance for those, and difficult times, but also understanding our biases for the difficult stuff. The way we're built. And I think as parents, we can hold that knowledge for them. Perhaps we don't need to explain all that to them, but we have that understanding, and that helps us hold ourselves with that as well.
I think that Velcro image though can be quite helpful for a child because it's very visual and it's something that they might experience. It might be on a school shoe. They often have a Velcro strap or something, and they'll know that things stick within that Velcro. If you've got a pet, you'll probably know that bits of pet hair might stick, so they'll experience that. So visually, that might be quite a helpful. And I'm conscious and wanted to ask you, sometimes this isn't just about the child. Sometimes the adult might be struggling to notice, that language about the good stories. They might be exhausted or, their understanding of what a good story might be. The bar might be high. They might be looking for something that they feel is kind of impressive is a big word, but the good stories can be really small. Someone tries even when they were frustrated, or they asked. I mean, this is a big one. Asked for help instead of going into a difficult behaviour for someone, or getting through a hard day. And I suppose what you were saying is the pattern the same. You kind of talked about the being evolutionary reasons for us holding on to difficult moments. Does that same bias affect adults too?
Oh yes, this is a lifelong aspect of living. Is managing ourselves. So getting to know our thoughts, getting to know the way we operate. I know that I catastrophize, and so I know that I can start with A and end up at C very quickly. Of, oh no, what's going to happen? This is going to happen, but that's me getting to know myself, and this is a lifetime exploration of knowing how our minds work. What are our patterns of thoughts? What are our patterns of feelings? Oh, I know I've gone there again. And of course, life events bring different challenges and different knowings about ourselves. So we can experience a life event, perhaps halfway through our life, and we can discover something about ourselves that we just didn't know about. I didn't know I'd react like that. And then with kindness, it's about, well, how do I manage myself here? How do I care for myself? And it's the same that we can afford that to our children.
There's something about kindness that weaves into this, doesn't it? And about turning to self with kindness. I was thinking about sharing this conversation with you, and thinking about, toxic positivity is something that's spoken about a lot, and the idea that none of this is about taking a difficult story and trying to share it in a different way. I had a real experience of this after COVID. My youngest and I were in a taxi, and a taxi driver was sharing a story, and he shared that he'd been very ill and spent a lot of time in hospital during COVID. And then my youngest very gently piped up, at least you had time off work. And there was just this very weighty silence, and just my heart squeezed. My youngest really wanted to find a way to soften the pain, and thought that he must find a positive in it. And Brené Brown talks about, rarely does an empathic response begin with at least, as I listened to him share, and I think that's something in these chats to talk about, that isn't what holding good stories means. It isn't repainting the difficult. It's witnessing small genuine stories of effort or kindness, or whatever qualities we feel are ones that we want to grow in our life, but witnessing them alongside the hard ones, and holding space that both can be true at once.
Yes, both can be true at once, I think. That's an important concept for children to understand, isn't it? Because we're full of differences, aren't we? that we can hold those stories for our children, can't we? In the moments where they really can't see them, where they're feeling that I just make a mess of everything. I'm just useless. I'm on the worst table in the class. And it's hard for them in that moment to see the bits that they excel at. It's important for us to hold both, isn't it?
You said there about I just mess everything up, and it makes me remember a conversation where it was about mess, and the story moved from there is mess, but I'm not the mess, and that kind of pulling apart, how powerful that can be. So I was thinking, if we're saying that, convincing them isn't a thing, what about you were saying there, Denise, that when our children can't hold on to the good stories, we can hold on to them instead. You were talking about this kind of sense of the grown-up holding what the child can't, not by forcing them to believe us, but this idea of keeping their story safe until they're ready for them. Going back to that idea, it's less about teaching and more about witnessing, less about you should feel good about yourself and more about I'm going to remember this for you. And I wondered if you could say a bit about what happens when we shift from trying to convince a child that they're wonderful to simply saying, I noticed this and I'm going to keep it safe.
Yeah. I think if you overpraise a child, because generally we think our children are fantastic, and they brighten our lives, don't they? They bring that love and sunshine into our lives. So, but if we reflect that back to them, it can be too overwhelming for them, and it doesn't really match with where they're at that time. A bit like your taxi driver, there was a mismatch there, wasn't there, really? And so what happens is that the child shuts down and they can't really hear, and they'll generally remove themselves, they'll withdraw. But within that, we can offer just very small, tiny, genuine reflections of noticing. And, I thinking about an example from my own life as driving my 2 grandchildren from school, and the older one was telling about really difficult day and friendship issues. She's at that age where all the dynamics are difficult, and so she was recounting it. But what I really noticed, I was listening to her, but what I suddenly noticed was how her younger sister was sitting very quietly, listening and allowing that. And because I noticed that, she wasn't trying to say, yes, and I had a bad day as well. And, she was allowing her sister to just be with this. And so I actually did say, I obviously gave some reflections back to the older sister, but I did actually comment about her allowing that space and how she listened so kindly and patiently to that. That was just a very small sentence. But that was an opportunity, not a purposeful opportunity. But I think what's important is the language of appreciation. I think that we can offer little appreciation in little comments. And we can do that within our family, can't we? We can sort of say, oh, thanks for doing that, love. to our partner, or somebody empties the dishwasher. It's that appreciating small things, and again, that's modelling, isn't it? So we're not doing the big praise, but we're actually demonstrating care and noticing for somebody else. And I think that sort of can be quite a nice habit to get into.
It feels like a precious moment in the car.
Yeah, it was, I suppose for me as well, it was acknowledging how the little one is emotionally maturing. That, she wasn't nestling in, what about me? But she was recognising this was a moment for her sister, and she was giving it space.
Yeah. It's interesting that, isn't it? Because she was then noticed for that space that she gave. So the moment, she was part of that moment too. Oh, it feels lovely. I'm also conscious, Denise, that when a child says, I'm not good at this, and they genuinely are finding something harder than their peers, whether it's learning, making friends, or managing their feelings, that sharing, I'm not good at this, it's not distorted. They're telling us what their experience is. And in those moments, witnessing isn't about countering with reassurance. It's about holding both truths. For example, this is genuinely hard for you. And I'm so glad you've shared, and I notice that you are trying in this. There's something about, sometimes I think when you share the idea of witnessing good stories in a child, it can feel like you're only trying to want to notice the good, but actually there's a moment to notice something that's difficult for the child as well.
I think acknowledging that we all have self-doubt. It's I frequently thrown into that land of self-doubt, and I think we all have a voice, don't we, that can be quite unkind as well. And I think as we get older, we can recognise that voice, and we can recognise the influence it's playing in a situation. Perhaps children don't have that; they're not yet aware of that. But I think what does help is for a child to be able to share that whatever's going on for them, the difficulties. Try and give it sort of some language.
Yes, and in that, then there's the opportunity for you as the grown-up to look at where are they trying to point out lack in them, and where are they actually recognising something that's difficult for them, where they actually need support. Where is it, if that makes sense, there's a distinction in that, isn't there? They might be sharing something and that there's actually support needed, or they might be sharing something and it's because they are being unkind to themselves and not noticing things that, and you're holding the stories for them.
And I think using reflective language of, this sounds really, really tricky. This sounds really difficult. How is that for you? Explore. It might be that actually they can't at that point. So just being with it, this sounds really difficult. You can offer that other bit, but they might not be ready to actually explore it.
Yes, and I think what you're talking, you were talking about small observations and how they land differently than big declarations, and I often talk about the idea of looking closely at a brief moment with accurate noticing and respond in a heartfelt, genuine way. And I suppose one of the things that I did wonder about, my story at the beginning about my friend cooking tea, I appreciate self-compassion is a mighty topic, but I just wondered if we just have a brief wonder about if we as the grown-ups are constantly criticising ourselves, if we're rushing to name our flaws before anyone else can, and our children are listening, that they're learning that language too.
Yeah. Yes, and I think it's very natural for us to speak out loud what we're not very good at. You know, it's it's partly defensive, isn't it? You know, but I think that language becomes just the common story of yourself. We all have stories about ourselves, don't we? Oh, I'm no good at this, and oh no, you wouldn't catch me doing that, I'd be useless. Or our family, you know, isn't particularly into those sort of things, but oh, we're not artistic or musical. You know, oh, we're not an athletic family. And then the child takes those stories on, and there's no space then, is there, for difference? No space for them to say, hang on, actually, you know, I am this person. And again, that modelling that negative part of yourself, you know, we are, I guess, giving them opportunities and space to to see what other people are good at in the family. You know, I made a really nice cake. You know, like your friend with the tea. Oh, how often do we say, I've made a really squummy cake here, or I've been great at this? Just doesn't happen very often, does it?
No.
But that sort of appreciation is contagious, just as doing the bad type of language and is contagious.
That's lovely. It makes me wonder, you know, if you were able to say something good about yourself, that sense of watching it catch, you know, how quickly it might catch and what you might hear.
Yeah.
One of the things that some can happen is sometimes there can be a tangible way to hold these stories. And it, you know, I think about the pressure that Pinterest and other craft type places can bring in terms of a busy family life. So, you know, you don't have to go down the tangible route, but sometimes for some families, a simple physical marker can help. You know, I remember a heart that had ribbons tied on it, and each ribbon was a different story that the grown-up knew about the child that the child wasn't able to hold yet. Or sometimes people might put pebbles in a jar or notes that as she might physically write the stories down. Not about creating a perfect project, but as a gentle reminder of moments that maybe could come back to. And I suppose I just wondered if we could wonder about that, Denise. If it didn't feel like that would bring more pressure, which if it would, then just, you know, put that to one side. But, you know, how could co-creating something with your child help them?
I think you know, we're talking about talked so much today about love, haven't we? And how love sits in the family, and brings to mind photographs for me.
Right.
And just the photographs that we have around our home of generally good times and smiley times. And I think there's a big connection there, isn't there, of when we can have those memories, and if it's something very tangible, like something that we brought from holiday, or you know, an object or a photograph, all the stories around that generate the love that we've got between us. But for that child and for the adult as well, it takes us to a nice place, doesn't it? And I think of happiness and self-worth, and importantly, belonging. You know, we're going back to that lovely word, belonging. And then that's the context, the culture then of being able to then be with difficult things too. If you've got that sense of belonging, safety, connection, difficult things can sit within that safely.
I think there's so much in this about noticing and how much it matters. And there's something about the grown-up having the steadiness to hold the stories. I'm just thinking about those photographs, and the child might want to hear the story even if they can't quite hold it yet themselves. I can imagine them saying, "Tell me about this photograph again." Sometimes when we do Worry Wizard fun shops, we talk about the idea of taking a photograph in your head of a certain moment, to hold it and then maybe come back to it, if that could be helpful. I just wanted us to pause here, and as we always do, and share that you know your child in ways that these short episodes never could. You understand their story, their pace, the full context of their life. And if your child's negative self-story feels persistent and painful, or if you're concerned that it's affecting them, then reaching out to a trusted professional can be a helpful next step. And if you're finding it hard to notice good stories right now, that matters too. It might be a gentle sign that you need some more support around you. What we're exploring here are gentle possibilities. The deep knowing of your child belongs with you. If it feels right this week, you could try gently noticing a moment your child might not see for themselves. It could be as simple as, "I noticed how you tried again even when it was tricky." Not to convince them, but just to hold it safe until they're ready. Some children might light up, others might shrug it off. What matters is your steady noticing, not their immediate belief. These chats are just beginnings. If you'd like to explore more, you'll find 2 other Worry Wizard podcasts inside In This Together, A Year with the Worry Wizard. One is Worry Wizard Wonderings, a co-listen for you and your child at bedtime, creating gentle moments of connection. The other is Wondering Together, just for grown-ups, so you feel confident holding what might emerge. Together, they're here to walk alongside you in everyday ups and downs, wobbly mornings, tricky bedtimes, and everything in between. Denise, thank you for wondering and chatting today, helping us explore what it means to witness the good in our children when they can't yet see it themselves.
You're very welcome.
For those listening, I know how hard it can feel when your child only remembers what went wrong, and it's so tempting to try to fix it quickly with big words of reassurance. For some children, those small, specific observations, "I noticed this, I'll keep it safe for you," can become little anchors. For others, what matters most is simply that you're there, steady, holding the good story quietly, even if they can't take it in yet. Both are loving, both are valid, and you're the best person to sense what feels right for your child in this moment. Your noticing, your patience, your steady presence, they matter more than you know. I'm sending you well-being wishes from me, Amy, the Worry Wizard.
When you're feeling scared like nobody cares, I hope that you know that I will always be there for you. I'm here for you. And tell me what you're thinking, 'cause I want to know. When your heart is sinking, I'll be there to show with proof. I'm here for you, 'cause I'll be your friend, an ear I'll lend. I'll tell you time and time again it's true.